Sir, please don't do it. The little girl's voice cracked through the freezing Manhattan rain just as the black limousine began to pull away from the curb. The driver slammed the brakes. Tires hissed against wet pavement. For one suspended second, the entire street seemed to freeze beneath the glow of gold hotel lights and falling winter rain. The child stood there trembling in the middle of the crosswalk, soaked from head to toe, clutching a dark leather wallet tightly against her chest like it was something alive. Her shoes were worn thin. One lace dragged through a puddle. Blonde hair clung to her pale cheeks in wet strands, and her small lungs fought for breath after running nearly 3 blocks through the storm. Inside the limousine, William Ashford slowly lifted his eyes from the city skyline outside the window. At 68 years old, William had spent decades building one of the largest financial empires in America. Newspapers called him ruthless. Television hosts called him brilliant. Investors called him untouchable. But tonight, under the dim amber glow inside the car, he looked like something else entirely. He looked tired, the kind of tired that money could not fix. Raindrops crawled slowly down the tinted glass beside him, bending the lights of New York into blurred rivers of gold and red. In his lap sat a folded piece of paper. The edges were worn from being opened too many times. A letter no one was supposed to read. The driver turned nervously. Sir, the girl. William's expression hardened automatically, the old billionaire mask sliding back into place. What does she want? But before the driver could answer, the rear passenger door suddenly opened. Cold rain and city noise rushed into the silent luxury of the vehicle. The little girl stood there breathing hard, one tiny hand gripping the door, the other holding out the missing wallet. You forgot this, she whispered. William stared at her without moving. Italian leather. Black American Express card. Family photographs. Nearly $12,000 in cash. Everything still inside. Most people never return the wallet. That was the point. For nearly 2 years, William Ashford had repeated the same quiet experiment in different cities across the country. Leave the wallet. Watch what people choose. Sometimes the money disappeared within minutes. Sometimes the cards were emptied before midnight. Once, a man had stolen the cash and mailed back the photographs alone. Each time, William felt something inside him grow colder, smaller. Tonight was supposed to be the final time. But then the girl spoke again, her blue eyes locking onto the folded letter still resting in his lap. Please don't do it, she said softly. William's hand instinctively covered the paper. His chest tightened. Do what? He asked carefully. The girl swallowed hard. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out anyway. Your daughter wouldn't want you to disappear. Silence swallowed the inside of the limousine. Even the rain outside suddenly seemed distant. William felt the air leave his lungs. No one was supposed to know about his daughter. No one was supposed to read the letter. The little girl lowered her eyes immediately, ashamed. I'm sorry, she whispered quickly. I wasn't trying to snoop. The paper fell out when I picked up the wallet near the train station. I saw her picture, and I read the first line by accident. William stared at the child standing in the rain beside his $1,000,000 car. She looked no older than 11. Skinny, exhausted, freezing cold. Yet somehow she was the first person in years who had spoken to him like he was not a billionaire. Not a headline. Not a machine. Just a grieving father sitting alone in the dark. William Ashford had spent 30 years surrounded by people who lied beautifully. Politicians lied with polished smiles. Investors lied with handshakes firm enough to break bones. Even charity galas lied beneath crystal chandeliers and violin music. But children did not usually lie with eyes like that. The little girl still stood beside the open limousine door, shivering beneath the freezing rain while steam curled from the city sewer grates around her ankles. Traffic crawled past in slow rivers of light. Somewhere farther down Fifth Avenue, a police siren echoed through the wet winter night. William studied her carefully now. She could not have weighed more than 70 pounds. Her oversized gray coat looked as though it had belonged to an adult once. The sleeves swallowed most of her hands except for the fingertips wrapped tightly around the leather wallet she had nearly risked herself to return. Her cheeks were pale from the cold, but her blue eyes remained strangely steady. Not fearless, just honest. The kind of honesty money rarely encountered. William slowly took the wallet from her trembling hands. Water dripped from her hair onto the polished black floor mat of the limousine. The driver frowned slightly at the mess, but one sharp glance from William silenced him immediately. "What is your name?" William asked quietly. The girl hesitated before answering. "Clara Bennett, sir." Her voice was soft but clear. Midwest accent. Probably not originally from New York. William nodded once. "And where are your parents, Clara?" The question changed something in her expression instantly. A shadow passed across her face, too old for an 11-year-old child. "Just my mom," she said. "She is homesick." William noticed the way she said home. Not comfortably. Carefully. Like the word itself was fragile. Rain hammered harder against the roof of the limousine now, creating a cocoon of sound around them, while the city blurred outside in gold and silver streaks. William glanced down at the folded letter still partially visible beside him. His throat tightened again. Clara noticed his eyes move toward it. "I really am sorry I read part of it," she whispered quickly. "I tried not to. But when the paper fell out, I thought maybe you were in trouble." William let out a slow breath through his nose. In trouble? If only she knew. 3 hours earlier, he had stood alone in his penthouse office staring at the Manhattan skyline, while snow drifted past 80-story windows. The building had felt less like a home and more like a marble tomb floating above the city. The staff moved quietly around him like ghosts. His assistant had canceled dinner reservations he never intended to attend. Another business award sat unopened in a velvet box near the fireplace. None of it mattered anymore. Not after Isabel. Even now, after 5 years, saying his daughter's name inside his own mind still felt like pressing against a bruise that never healed. Clara shifted nervously beneath his silence. "I know it sounds weird," she continued softly, "but my grandpa used to say people who want to disappear start giving things away first." William blinked slowly. "Your grandfather told you that?" Clara nodded. "Before he died." The words landed quietly between them. William suddenly became aware of something he had not felt in a very long time. Not pity. Not admiration. Recognition. This little girl standing barefoot in puddles outside a luxury hotel knew something about grief. The driver finally cleared his throat. "Sir, the gala is starting upstairs." William did not answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on Clara. Rainwater still dripped from the ends of her hair onto the pavement below. She looked exhausted. Hungry, maybe. Yet she had returned enough money to change her life forever without taking a single dollar. William looked past her toward the glowing hotel entrance where wealthy donors in tuxedos disappeared beneath golden lights and heated awnings. Then he looked back at the freezing child standing alone in the rain. Something inside his chest shifted for the first time in years. Small. Painful. Human. William Ashford made a decision that surprised even himself. "Get in," he said quietly. Clara's eyes widened immediately. "Sir, you are freezing." His voice remained calm, almost distant, but there was less steel in it now. "I am not going to let an 11-year-old stand in the rain while I sit in a heated car." Clara hesitated beside the open door. She looked back toward the glowing train station across the street as if expecting someone to stop her. Nobody did. New York moved around them with its usual indifference. Yellow cabs splashed through puddles. Steam drifted from underground vents. Far above, giant digital billboards painted shifting colors across the wet buildings. Yet for Clara, the entire city suddenly felt very far away. Slowly, carefully, she climbed into the limousine. The warmth hit her instantly. Soft leather seats, the faint scent of cedarwood, and expensive cologne. Thick carpets so clean they barely looked real. Clara sat stiffly near the edge of the seat, trying not to drip water onto anything. William noticed immediately. "You are not ruining the car," he said without looking at her. Clara lowered her eyes. "Sorry, sir." The driver closed the door, shutting out the storm in one smooth motion. Silence settled over the cabin again, softer this time. William studied the child beside him through the reflection in the darkened window. Up close, she looked even younger than he first thought. Her cheeks were hollow from too many missed meals. Tiny cracks marked her knuckles from winter cold. There was a faint stain of flower pollen on the cuff of her coat. "You sell flowers near the station," William said. Clara blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" "Your sleeve." She glanced down and quickly brushed at the yellow dust with embarrassment. "Oh." William looked away toward the skyline again. "How long have you been doing that?" "Since September." "Every day?" Clara nodded. "After school?" William frowned slightly. "At 11 years old." Clara gave a tiny shrug that did not belong on a child. My mom cannot work much right now. The answer hung quietly in the warm air between them. William had heard thousands of people talk about struggle during charity dinners and fundraising speeches. But those conversations usually happened over $500 steaks beneath chandeliers taller than most houses. Clara spoke about hardship differently, without performance, without self-pity, just truth. The limousine rolled slowly through midtown traffic now, passing glowing storefronts dressed for Christmas. Giant wreaths hung from luxury hotels. Ice skaters glided beneath white lights at Rockefeller Center. Couples laughed beneath umbrellas, while doormen in tailored coats opened polished brass doors. Clara watched everything through the window with silent fascination. She looked like someone peering into another universe. William noticed her staring at a bakery window where rows of cakes spun beneath golden lights. "Are you hungry?" he asked suddenly. Clara immediately shook her head too quickly. "No, sir." William almost smiled. Children were terrible liars. "When was the last time you ate?" Clara stayed quiet for several seconds. "This morning." "What did you have?" "Half a bagel." William looked down at his hands. Somewhere deep inside his chest, guilt twisted unexpectedly. Not because of Clara specifically, because there were thousands like her in the same city where men bid $200,000 for paintings during charity auctions upstairs tonight. The contradiction suddenly felt unbearable. The driver's voice interrupted softly from the front seat. "Sir, should I continue to the gala entrance?" William glanced toward the towering hotel ahead, where photographers already crowded beneath bright white lights. Wealthy guests stepped from black cars smiling for cameras, while violin music drifted faintly through the rain. Usually William moved through those events like a king returning to his castle. Tonight the thought exhausted him. Then he noticed Clara quietly staring at the folded letter still resting beside him. She quickly looked away when she realized he caught her. William's voice softened slightly. "You really thought I was going to disappear?" Clara swallowed hard. People who still carry pictures like that usually miss someone very badly. William stared at her in silence. Then, for the first time in years, the billionaire who intimidated senators and controlled billion-dollar markets felt completely seen by an 11-year-old girl wearing soaked sneakers. The limousine never stopped at the grand entrance. Instead, William leaned forward slightly and gave a quiet instruction to the driver. "Take us downtown." The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror, confused for half a second. "Downtown, sir." "Yes." The man nodded immediately and turned the wheel away from the glowing hotel canopy, where cameras flashed like lightning against the rain. Clara looked back through the rear window as the gala disappeared behind them. She could still see women in diamond necklaces stepping carefully out of luxury cars, while photographers shouted names into the cold night air. It looked like another planet. Inside the limousine, the warmth made Clara's eyelids feel heavy for the first time all day. Her fingers slowly relaxed around the frayed sleeve of her coat. William noticed she was trying very hard not to fall asleep. Children fighting exhaustion always looked heartbreakingly small. "Where do you live?" he asked quietly. Clara straightened immediately. "Brooklyn." "With your mother?" "Yes, sir." William nodded once. "What is her name?" "Emily Bennett." Clara's face softened slightly when she said it. William noticed that too. Love always changed people's voices. "What does your mother do?" Clara hesitated. "She used to work at a diner near Queens." "Used to." Another word carrying more weight than it should. "And now?" Clara looked down at her hands. "Now she mostly sleeps." William felt something cold settle in his chest again. He had seen that sentence before in hospital rooms. The city outside gradually changed as the limousine moved farther south. The glittering towers of Midtown gave way to older brick buildings streaked dark from years of rain and winter smoke. Luxury storefronts disappeared. So did the Christmas lights. Here, the streets looked tired. Corner grocery stores glowed beneath flickering signs. Steam rose from subway grates beside men wrapped in blankets against building walls. Clara suddenly leaned forward. "Can we stop here?" William followed her eyes toward a tiny 24-hour pharmacy squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop. "Why?" he asked. Clara bit her lip nervously. "My mom's medicine." William noticed her hand instinctively reach toward the pocket inside her coat. Money. Probably flour money. Pennies and crumpled bills collected all week in the freezing cold. "What medicine?" he asked carefully. "Heart medication." Her voice lowered. "She has been taking half doses to make it last longer." William looked away toward the rain-covered window because for one dangerous second, he felt ashamed of himself. Not rich man guilt. Something deeper. Earlier that same afternoon, he had nearly spent $30,000 on a vintage bottle of wine during a private auction without thinking twice. Meanwhile, an 11-year-old girl was rationing medicine for her sick mother. The imbalance of it suddenly felt grotesque. "Driver," William said quietly. "Pull over." The limousine stopped beside the pharmacy. Clara immediately looked nervous again. "I can go by myself," she said quickly. "You do not have to wait." William ignored that entirely. "What medication does she take?" Clara blinked. "Sir, your mother." Clara slowly told him the name. William repeated it once under his breath, then opened the divider window, separating them from the driver. "Go inside and buy a 1-month supply." The driver nodded immediately. Clara's eyes widened in panic. "No, no, sir, that is too much." William turned toward her fully now. "Clara." His voice was calm, but it carried the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Your mother should not have to choose between medicine and groceries." Clara looked down quickly, embarrassed by the sudden sting of tears in her eyes. She pressed her lips together hard, trying to stay composed. William noticed that too. Pride. Even now. Especially now. Outside, rainwater streamed down the pharmacy windows while the driver disappeared inside beneath fluorescent lights. Clara whispered so softly William almost missed it. "Thank you." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the folded letter still resting beside him. Only 3 hours earlier, he had believed the world no longer contained goodness worth staying for. Now an exhausted little girl with wet shoes and empty pockets was quietly dismantling that belief one sentence at a time. The driver returned carrying a small white pharmacy bag protected beneath his coat from the rain. Clara stared at it, as though it were something unreal. Her fingers tightened nervously in her lap. "Sir, that costs too much," she whispered again. William accepted the bag from the driver and placed it gently beside her on the leather seat. "So does losing someone you love," he said quietly. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Clara looked at him carefully after that, not like a child staring at a billionaire, but like someone trying to understand a wound. Outside, Brooklyn rose around them in dark brick buildings and glowing apartment windows. The rain had softened now into a cold mist drifting through narrow streets lined with parked cars and overflowing trash bins. Christmas decorations hung unevenly from fire escapes. Some windows glowed warm and golden. Others stayed dark. Clara suddenly pointed toward an old 6-story building squeezed between a deli and a boarded-up storefront. "There," she said softly. The limousine slowed beside the curb. William looked up at the building. Age-stained every brick. The front awning sagged slightly from years of snow and rain. One fluorescent light flickered weakly above the entrance like it was struggling to stay alive. Clara immediately grabbed the pharmacy bag. "Thank you for the ride," she said quickly, already reaching for the door handle. William frowned slightly. "That is all." Clara blinked. "Sir, you nearly chased down a moving limousine in freezing rain to return a wallet full of cash." He tilted his head slightly. "And now you are dismissing me like a taxi driver." For the first time that night, Clara smiled a little. It was small and tired, but genuine. "I did not want to bother you anymore." William felt something twist painfully in his chest again. Children should never learn how to make themselves smaller for the convenience of adults. "Clara," he said quietly, "may I meet your mother?" The smile disappeared instantly. Fear replaced it. "Our apartment is messy." William almost laughed at the innocence of that answer. Billion-dollar boardrooms never scared him. Government investigations never scared him. But asking an 11-year-old girl to let someone see her home suddenly felt like crossing sacred ground. "I am not concerned about messy apartments," he said gently. Clara hesitated for several seconds before finally nodding once. The elevator inside the building smelled faintly of dust, old radiator heat, and fried onions from another floor. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed softly while the elevator climbed upward with slow, painful creaks. Clara stood clutching the medicine bag tightly against her chest, while William remained beside her in silence. He noticed she kept smoothing her wet hair nervously with one hand, embarrassed, preparing him for disappointment before he even arrived. The apartment door opened quietly after Clara unlocked 3 separate locks. Warm air carrying the scent of canned soup and old books drifted into the hallway. The apartment itself was tiny. One lamp glowed beside a worn couch patched carefully at the armrests. The kitchen table held unopened bills stacked beneath a ceramic mug filled with pencils. A small artificial Christmas tree stood crooked near the window with only half its lights working. But the thing William noticed first was the sound. Coughing. Weak. Exhausted. From the bedroom doorway appeared a woman no older than 35 wrapped in a faded gray sweater. Her blonde hair was loosely tied back, though strands had fallen around her pale face. She looked startled at first, then immediately alarmed seeing a wealthy stranger standing behind her daughter. "Clara," she asked quickly. "Who is this?" Clara hurried forward. "Mom, it is okay. This is Mr. Ashford." Emily Bennett froze completely. Even exhausted and sick, she clearly recognized the name. Nearly everyone in America did. William stepped forward carefully, suddenly feeling strangely nervous. "Your daughter returned something valuable to me tonight," he said softly. Emily's eyes immediately moved to Clara. "You found somebody's wallet again?" Clara looked embarrassed. "This one belonged to a billionaire." Emily closed her eyes briefly like a mother too tired to survive another surprise. William expected awkwardness after that. Gratitude maybe. Suspicion. Instead, Emily looked directly at her daughter and whispered the words that changed everything for him. "I told you honest hearts still matter." William stood motionless beneath the dim apartment light while something inside him quietly broke apart. William Ashford had attended dinners inside royal palaces, private meetings inside government buildings, and celebrations on yachts larger than most apartment complexes. Yet somehow, standing inside Emily Bennett's tiny Brooklyn apartment felt more honest than any of them. The room carried the marks of people fighting quietly to survive. A sewing kit sat open beside the couch where Emily had probably repaired Clara's clothes instead of buying new ones. School books were stacked neatly near the heater with library due dates carefully marked on sticky notes. Even the refrigerator hummed with the tired sound of old machinery working harder than it should. Nothing in the apartment was expensive, but everything had been cared for. Emily noticed William looking around and immediately misread his silence. "I know it is small," she said softly, embarrassed. "I usually keep things cleaner. I just have not been feeling well lately." William turned toward her slowly. "Miss Bennett," he said quietly, "I have seen penthouses worth $50 million feel emptier than this room." Emily blinked in surprise. Clara looked back and forth between them, confused by the sudden softness in the billionaire's voice. William's eyes drifted toward the half-lit Christmas tree near the window. Handmade paper ornaments hung unevenly from the branches. One had glitter falling off the edges. Another clearly showed a child's handwriting in silver marker. "Family is where light stays alive." William stared at the ornament longer than he intended. Isabel used to make decorations like that every December. At 7 years old, she once covered an entire piano with paper snowflakes because she wanted their house to feel magical. He could still remember her laugh echoing through the hallways. Bright, weightless, alive. The memory hit him so suddenly he had to look away. Emily noticed immediately. Mothers always notice pain in people. "Would you like some tea?" she asked gently. William almost declined automatically. Men like him were always rushing somewhere. Meetings, flights, galas, decisions worth billions made between phone calls. But tonight, for the first time in years, nowhere else felt important. "I would like that very much," he said quietly. Emily moved slowly through the tiny kitchen, trying not to cough, while filling a kettle with water. Clara immediately stepped beside her mother to help without even being asked. She reached for mugs automatically. Sugar packets. Tea bags. The movements were practiced. Familiar. William watched them in silence. Teamwork born from hardship. Not convenience. Love. Clara suddenly looked toward him from the kitchen. "Did your daughter like Christmas too?" The question landed softly but directly. Emily froze beside the stove. William remained still for several seconds. Most people avoided mentioning Isabel around him. Executives changed the subject. Friends lowered their voices awkwardly. Even family members treated her name like fragile glass. But Clara asked with the innocent honesty of a child who had not yet learned adults hide grief instead of speaking it aloud. William finally nodded once. "Very much." Clara smiled faintly. "Mine too." Emily handed William a chipped ceramic mug a few moments later. Snowflakes decorated the side, faded from years of washing. William accepted it carefully with both hands. The tea smelled faintly of cinnamon. Outside the apartment window, rain tapped softly against the glass while distant sirens drifted through Brooklyn streets below. For the first time in longer than he could remember, William Ashford did not feel alone inside the silence. Then Clara noticed something sticking slightly from his coat pocket. The folded letter. Her expression changed instantly. Small concern. Quiet fear. "Are you still thinking about disappearing?" she asked softly. Emily looked startled. "Clara." But William slowly removed the letter from his pocket and stared at it beneath the warm apartment light. The paper suddenly looked smaller than before. Less powerful somehow. He admitted quietly. Emily's face softened with immediate understanding, the kind only exhausted people recognize in each other. Clara stepped closer carefully. "You do not have to anymore," she whispered. William looked up at the child standing beneath the crooked Christmas lights, and for the first time in years, the future no longer looked completely dark. The clock above the stove read 11:43 p.m. when William finally realized he had missed the charity gala entirely. Somewhere across Manhattan, wealthy donors were probably still applauding speeches about compassion while sipping champagne beneath crystal chandeliers. His phone had buzzed nearly 20 times inside his coat pocket. Board members, assistants, event organizers. He ignored every call. Clara sat cross-legged on the living room floor finishing the last of a grilled cheese sandwich Emily had insisted she eat. The little girl looked calmer now that warmth had returned to her cheeks. Rain still traced soft lines down the apartment windows while the old radiator hissed unevenly beside the couch. William watched the room quietly over the rim of his teacup. Nothing matched. The couch cushions sagged. The curtains were slightly uneven. One kitchen cabinet refused to close all the way. Yet somehow the apartment still carried more peace than his penthouse overlooking Central Park. Emily noticed him staring at the half-lit Christmas tree again. "Clara made most of the ornaments," she said softly. William stepped closer to the tree. Construction paper stars. Hand-painted snowflakes. Tiny strings of popcorn carefully looped around the branches. Then his eyes stopped on a framed photograph sitting beneath the lowest branch. Emily and Clara at Coney Island during summer. Clara laughing with cotton candy in her hand, while Emily smiled beside her beneath the sunlight. William felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. There had once been photographs exactly like that in his home too. Before hospital rooms. Before funeral flowers. Before silence swallowed everything. Clara suddenly looked up from the floor. "Do you want to see something?" William blinked. "What is it?" She hurried into the bedroom and returned carrying a small wooden box with peeling blue paint around the edges. It looked old and heavily used. Clara carefully placed it on the coffee table and opened the lid. Inside were dozens of folded pieces of paper. William frowned slightly. "What are those?" Clara smiled shyly. "Good things." Emily laughed softly from the kitchen. "She writes down every good thing that happens to us." William looked back at the box. "Every good thing." Clara nodded seriously. "Mom says bad memories stay by themselves. Good memories need help." She handed him one folded paper. William opened it carefully. "Mom laughed at my snowman, even though it looked terrible." Another read. "Found $5 in my winter coat pocket." Another. "We watch fireworks from the roof for free." William stared silently at the tiny handwritten notes. Some were written in pencil because ink had probably run out. Others were written in different colors, depending on which marker Clara could find. Ordinary moments. Tiny moments. But preserved like treasure. Clara pointed toward the box proudly. "When Mom feels sad, we read them together." William suddenly understood why the apartment felt different from every mansion he had ever entered. Hope lived here deliberately, protected carefully like a candle during a storm. His eyes drifted again toward the folded letter still resting near his coat on the chair. One piece of paper meant to end everything. Another box filled with papers trying to remember reasons to keep going. The contrast hit him like a wave. Emily noticed where he was looking. "Loss can make the world feel very small," she said quietly. "After Clara's father died, there were months I barely got out of bed." William looked toward her slowly. Emily rested one hand against the kitchen counter for balance while speaking. "But children keep asking life to continue." Her eyes moved toward Clara with quiet love. "Eventually you start listening." Silence filled the apartment again. Soft, warm, human. Then Clara walked over and gently placed one blank slip of paper into William's hand. "You should add one," she whispered. William stared down at the empty square of paper resting against his palm. For several seconds he could not speak at all. Finally, with slightly shaking fingers, he picked up a pencil from the table and slowly wrote 7 simple words. A little girl returned my faith tonight. Clara read the sentence and smiled. Emily quietly turned away toward the kitchen because she suddenly had tears in her eyes. And for the first time since Isabel died, William Ashford felt something inside his chest begin to heal instead of hurt. William did not leave the Bennett apartment until nearly 2 in the morning. By then, the rain had stopped completely, leaving Brooklyn washed in silver reflections beneath streetlights and winter fog. Clara had fallen asleep curled against the corner of the couch with the wooden memory box still resting beside her. One small hand remained loosely wrapped around the pencil she had used earlier. Emily gently placed a blanket over her daughter before walking William to the apartment door. The hallway outside was quiet except for the distant hum of pipes inside the walls. For a moment, neither of them spoke. William looked older now than he had earlier that evening. Not weaker, just unguarded. Emily crossed her arms lightly against the cold draft creeping through the hallway window. She meant what she said, Emily whispered softly. William looked toward the sleeping child through the partially open doorway. About what? About you staying. Her voice carried no judgment, only kindness. Children can tell when somebody is tired in their soul. William lowered his eyes briefly. I used to think grief faded with time. Emily gave a sad little smile. No. You just learn how to carry it differently. The word stayed with him all the way back to Manhattan. The limousine moved through nearly empty streets while the city slept beneath pale winter light. Somewhere in Queens, bakers were already beginning their morning shifts. Garbage trucks rattled through narrow alleys. Steam curled upward from rooftop vents into the freezing dark sky. New York never truly slept. It simply kept surviving. William stared out the window while Clara's small handwritten note rested folded carefully inside his coat pocket beside the unfinished letter he had written earlier that night. One paper had nearly ended his life. The other had quietly saved it. When the limousine finally pulled into the underground entrance of his penthouse tower, the security staff immediately straightened in surprise. William never returned home this late without a full convoy of assistants and executives surrounding him. Tonight he walked through the marble lobby alone, carrying a little white pharmacy receipt still tucked absent-mindedly in his coat. The penthouse greeted him with silence as vast as a cathedral. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, where snow had begun lightly dusting the trees below. The fireplace remained cold. Half-finished whiskey still sat beside the piano untouched from earlier that evening. William slowly removed the folded goodbye letter from his pocket and stared at it beneath the city lights. The paper suddenly looked pathetic, small, cowardly. Then his eyes drifted toward a framed photograph sitting beside the piano. Isabel at 13 years old smiling during a charity concert, her blonde hair glowing beneath stage lights while her fingers hovered above piano keys. William walked slowly toward the photograph. I almost left, he whispered hoarsely. His reflection stared back at him faintly in the glass. Tired eyes, gray hair. A man who had mistaken success for meaning until grief hollowed him out from the inside. Then he remembered Clara standing in the rain outside the limousine, saying 4 simple words. Please do not do it. William closed his eyes tightly for one long moment. Finally, without hesitation, he tore the goodbye letter cleanly in half. Then again, and again, the pieces drifted slowly into the fireplace like dead leaves. He stood there breathing hard, while something invisible finally loosened around his chest. His phone suddenly buzzed again on the piano. Another missed call from his board chairman. William stared at it briefly before doing something nobody inside Ashford Financial had ever seen him do. He turned the phone off completely. Then he walked toward his office overlooking the sleeping city and opened his laptop. Not to review stock reports. Not to study market forecasts. Instead, he searched for the best cardiac specialists in New York for Emily Bennett. He searched for educational grants for Clara. He searched for apartment listings in safer neighborhoods with sunlight and working heat and elevators that did not smell like rust. Outside the windows, snow continued falling softly across Manhattan, while inside the penthouse, for the very first time in years, William Ashford began planning for a future he actually wanted to live long enough to see. Spring arrived in New York slowly that year. Snow melted into rain. Bare trees softened into green. The city traded gray skies for sunlight reflecting across glass towers and crowded sidewalks. And somewhere between winter and spring, 3 broken lives quietly changed each other forever. Clara Bennett no longer sold flowers outside the subway station after school. Instead, every afternoon she sat beside the giant windows of St. Mary's Academy, wearing a navy blue uniform that still felt unreal against her skin. The scholarship had arrived anonymously at first. Full tuition, books, transportation, music lessons, even a small note attached in careful handwriting. Honest hearts deserve every opportunity to grow. Clara knew exactly who sent it anyway. Emily's health improved too. Slowly. Some mornings were still difficult, but the exhaustion no longer looked permanent in her eyes. The treatments William arranged gave her something she had not felt in years. Time. Real time. Enough to laugh again. Enough to cook dinner while music played softly through the apartment. Enough to start planning instead of merely surviving. William visited often after that winter night. Never with cameras. Never with reporters. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes books for Clara. Sometimes he simply arrived carrying coffee and sat quietly listening to Emily talk while sunlight filled the apartment. The neighbors eventually stopped staring when the black limousine parked outside the building every week. To Clara, he slowly stopped feeling like a billionaire at all. He became something else. Someone who remembered to ask about her spelling tests. Someone who complained dramatically whenever she beat him at chess. Someone who smiled again. One Saturday afternoon in May, William stood inside a newly renovated community music center in Brooklyn while workers finished hanging the final sign above the entrance. Isabel Ashford Center for Young Artists. Clara stared up at the letters in amazement. "You named it after your daughter?" she asked softly. William nodded once. Sunlight poured through the tall windows beside him, warming the silver in his hair. She believed music made people less lonely. Clara looked around the beautiful building filled with polished pianos, bright classrooms, and shelves waiting for children who could never normally afford lessons. "A lot of kids are going to be happy here." William looked down at her quietly. "One little girl. Already changed my life here." Clara smiled shyly and lowered her eyes. Some things still embarrassed her. Praise was one of them. Later that evening, after the opening ceremony ended and the last guests disappeared into the warm spring air, William remained alone inside the music hall for a few extra minutes. Soft piano music drifted through the empty room. Clara sat at the grand piano near the stage, practicing carefully beneath the golden lights. Her fingers moved slowly but confidently across the keys, while Emily watched proudly from the front row. William stood silently near the back of the room listening. Years earlier, after Isabel died, he had locked the piano inside his penthouse because hearing music hurt too much. Tonight, for the first time since losing his daughter, the sound no longer felt painful. It felt like healing. Clara finished the song and looked up nervously. "Was it okay?" William's eyes glistened slightly as he smiled. "It was beautiful." Clara grinned proudly while Emily laughed softly beside her. The sound echoed warmly through the hall. William glanced upward toward the ceiling lights glowing against polished wood and understood something at last. Wealth had never saved him. Power had never healed him. But kindness had. A freezing night. A lost wallet. A little girl who chose honesty when life had given her every reason not to. Sometimes the rarest miracles do not arrive with headlines or applause. Sometimes they arrive wearing wet shoes, carrying a broken umbrella, and reminding a stranger that even after unbearable loss, the human heart can still find its way back to the light.